This guy here is credited with introducing the modern education system in India. A section of the academia and intellectuals praised Thomas Babington Macaulay for introducing English education and democratizing knowledge to the masses. However, education in Britain itself was a privilege and was not meant for all back then. Only the gentlemen's children were meant to have the knowledge of government and rule in the Commonwealth. It was only towards the end of the 17th century that a few charity schools were set up for the commoners to raise them to the level of religious instruction. These gradually became Sunday schools and eventually day schools. Education for the masses in Britain were just restricted to religious instruction and basic reading, writing, and arithmetic as late as 1834, a year before the Macaulay's Minute on Indian Education. But around the same time, British education was undergoing a massive change, a change that came from India. Far away in Madras, Andrew Bell was employed by the East India Company and was in charge of the education of some 200 boys who were children of European soldiers and Indian women. One morning in the year 1789, Dr. Bell happened to pass a Malabar school, which, as was usual with Indian schools, was held in the open air. He saw the little children writing with their fingers on sand and teaching each other. Deeply impressed, Bell, on his return to the college which he directed, tried to persuade his colleagues of the value of what he had discovered. He then hit upon the idea of entrusting to an 8-year-old boy the task of teaching the ABCs to his fellow pupils. This putting of trust in a child proved right, for Bell quickly achieved excellent results. His colleagues were won over and other classes were similarly organized with other children in charge. More advanced pupils, or the monitors, were paired with less advanced ones and were asked to teach one another. Thus the monitorial system was born. Bell experimented successfully with this method and in 1797 published the description of his Madras method in England. James Tooley, a British educationist, discovered that the new National Society for the Education for the Poor in 1811 had adapted this Madras method, and by 1821, 300,000 children were being educated by Bell's principles. The Indian education system was thus adapted, or rather imitated, in England. This, along with several other changes, led to a massive jump in the literacy rates in Britain. To put in a nutshell, an Englishman took India's education model to Britain and successfully educated British children. But what exactly was the education model followed in pre-colonial India at that time? Let's take a look. The Beautiful Tree, a seminal work of noted author Dharampal, sheds light on the status of education in Bengal, Bihar, Madras, Bombay and Punjab presidencies using reports and surveys made by British missionaries and colonial administrators. A survey of the indigenous education system commissioned by Colonel Thomas Munro revealed a decentralized and more egalitarian system of education than the one that existed in Britain. Sir Thomas Munro notes that in the Madras presidency alone in 1823, there were 12,498 schools. Christian missionary William Adam in 1830 reports that there were about 1 lakh schools in Bengal and Bihar, roughly one school per village. It was the same for Bombay and Punjab presidencies. F.W. Thomas, in his The History and Prospects of British Education in India, writes, "The English found in India a widespread system of elementary education and higher education, of which the former was mainly practical and the latter mainly literary, philosophical and religious. Elementary education was widespread in both rural and urban areas and was encouraged at every level of society, as attested by the writings of Edward Ives, John Malcolm and Quentin Crawford. In schools that provided elementary education, generally teachers were appointed and students were admitted irrespective of caste or creed. In Bengal province, the so-called depressed classes were employed as teachers, and there were also Muslim teachers for Hindu boys. Schools were accommodated in simple thatched houses or under a tree. In terms of the content and proportion of those attending institutional school education, the situation in India was better than that in England. Rules of arithmetic and accountancy were taught to students, and so were the fundamentals of the physical and natural sciences. Students learned to write on different mediums, on the ground, on palm or plantain leaf, and on paper. Books like Nagalingayana Katha, Vishwakarma Purana, etc. were used for children from communities involved in manufacturing and craftsmanship. Subjects ranging from grammar, logic, law, and astrology to literature, mythology, lexicology, medicine, rhetoric, Vedanta, Mimamsa, Tantra, Sankhya, etc. were imparted to children at different age groups. For instance, the study of grammar started at the earliest age of 9 to 12 years and of law, mythology, tantras, etc. after the age of 20. Classes usually started around 6 am with 1 or 2 short intervals for meals, etc. and finished at sunset or sometimes extended late till dinner. The period of education spanned anywhere between 7 to 15 years. Education in these traditional institutions were financed by revenue contributions from the community, including illiterate peasants. These striking aspects in India's indigenous education system had caught the attention of the British, and they began modeling and developing their education system on these lines. Apart from Bell's monitorial system, private schools in Britain were funded the same way the schools of early 19th century India were funded. While this counts as yet another treasure, stolen or copied by the British from India, India's own education system was systematically destroyed. In 1854, Thomas Babington Macaulay had established his first school in India. By 1858, there were 452 schools and colleges with a total enrollment of 20,874 in 21 districts of Madras Presidency. This was much less than the number of schools and colleges that existed earlier. Instead of raising the literacy levels, the rate of growth of literacy in India under the Macaulay education system began to fall compared to the rate of growth of literacy in Britain under the Madras method of private school enrollment. Macaulay's system also perpetuated and amplified the social distances among the different occupational groups in India. While India's indigenous education was meant to empower individuals and help them live in harmony in the large society, the British policy of education to masses was a means of social control. Discrimination was the premise on which Macaulay's education system was built. After all, Macaulay had envisaged creating a class of persons Indian in blood and color, but English in taste, in opinions, in morals, and in intellect. So Macaulay is not the father of modern Indian education, but a man who served the death blow to the Indic system of education, remnants of which are still present today. To put it simply, in the words of their own man Tooley, Macaulay was a man who uprooted the beautiful tree.